So where I think everyone has to kind of realize, where do you want your product distributed? How are you going to get eyeballs on your product? And that's part of the production level. So I feel I have like three different production levels. One is distribution through YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook, and other social outlets. That would be production level one. Production level two would be a PBS and other streaming channels and movie festivals. That would be two. And then if you have real big hopes, obviously it's distribution through a theatrical release. And that's number three. All different bananas. But what was interesting about the AI that I put that information in, it was repetitive on each level, and it's the truth. No matter where you are in distribution, there are some basic elements of production that has to be established in each group, and that's the important thing for everyone to understand, that it's that. And my biggest thing after 40 years of production, what I've really learned is audio is the most important thing that we do. And I basically tell people, all I'm doing is cutting radio and then laying picture on top of my audio edits. And that's basically what editing is to me, So it's all about audio. So nowadays, when I go to a production, and I do a lot of run and gun stuff. So I'm on the street, cars are going by, generators are going by, whatever it is. That's my main thrust, is how am I going to get some good audio? And what is my audio base going to be? So my experience tells people, think first about audio. And just like what Lorraine was talking about, she's trying to get money to bring in a sound designer, because sound is everything. It's our emotional capsule for us. And if we can hit the sound great, people will let low budget visuals go by, but they will not let it, because it's emotional. And as soon as you let those people fall away because of audio, you've lost them. And it took me a long time. And even 40 years ago, I showed my mom one thing I was doing, and she questioned my freaking audio. So I said, oh my God, I cannot ever let that go by. And that if my mom hears it, and but everyone's sophisticated. We push on a button and we have broadcast television, which is great audio most of the time, so we're accustomed to that, and it's emotional, and that's
Mark,
where we have to go.
Quick question: because you've identified sound as the big, one of the biggest potholes and one of the biggest advantages. What do you do in the field or in the pre-post, window to prepare for post with your sound?
Well, because I'm a runner and gun producer, so I'm a one-man band. I have a beautiful a microphone into a mixer on my monopod system. And then when I'm doing interviews, I have a wireless that I hook to a subject. So I get dual audio, one with the shotgun and one with the lav. And most of the time I'm taking the lav from a subject. But it's a backup for me to have that. But we're talking, run and gun type of thing. But I recommend always doubling your audio. And if you have a little Zoom audio mixer or Zoom recorder. One of those are only a couple $100. I mean, invest in that because, if you can do that, you're going to use it down the road, so I double it. And then the beautiful thing about, I cut on Final Cut Pro, and they've come out with a voice isolator app on their program. Oh my God, it saves my ass. It's amazing what it does. And you can't get too wild with it because then you start to crush it. But you just give a little bit of it, and it's amazing how good it is. And it's right on Final Cut. It's a free plugin. And anybody that does that, I just noticed today, Premiere is giving a free app on Premiere to, fix audio, and you can go play with that. But
Mark, quick question. Quick question. When you say Zoom is like a modern day Nagra, correct? I mean, it's a piece of hardware.
Yes. And they have different levels of them, but for $200, and I think Joe knows a lot more about this because, he's double syncing stuff. I don't like to double sync because most of my stuff is down and dirty. And, I don't shoot vlog or anything. I expose beautifully. I'm in and out, and I produce something within 3 days, and it's on the internet,
Let's let Joe, Mark, I think let's let Joe speak to the sound pad, since we've all identified that that's really one of the most.
I think so.
Okay. Let's see. So what would
Over to you.
What would you like to know about sound? As he was saying, it's very important to get it right, to use a shotgun mic or lavs, and listen through headphones when you're recording so that the sound is quality. Preferably use a floating point recorder rather than like, for instance, the Zoom F3, such that you don't have to worry about setting levels. You will never get clipped audio if you're using a floating point recorder, which almost anybody has experienced, where the levels aren't quite set right, or somebody is very loud, and you get this clipped audio that you can't use, or is very hard in post to fix. If you use floating point, 32-bit floating point audio recorder like a Zoom F3, then that problem goes away. Sync the sound if you can, because somebody so you'll have, if you're shooting on a prosumer camcorder or something, or most anytime you're shooting, you're going to have the sound recorder and the camera. The camera will be recording some form of audio, scratch audio, and afterwards you can put them together automatically, as long as you're sure that you have decent audio on your camera. It doesn't have to be perfect, but levels are set in the ballpark. You can just automatically sync your second system sound and your camera sound. All of these things are things that the editor will have to do later if you don't do it for them. There's a bunch of other things that are really important that aren't specifically related to sound, if you want me to just keep going. Edit your footage. Try to make assemblies as you're shooting, as you're going. If you're shooting for a month or a year, you will benefit from trying to put things together, because you'll find out how well your footage cuts together, and you'll find what other bits of footage you wish you'd gotten, and you can get them later. You'll also get more of a feel for your story, and understand what your story is. As far as I'm concerned, before you start shooting, you should have some idea of, here's what I think the story is. It's going to be fine if it changes, but if you know what it is, then you'll have a decent idea of what it is that you need to go out and gather. And as it changes, that can adjust. But one of the worst things to have from an editing point of view is to have somebody just dump a huge amount of footage in your lap and say, I think there's a story in there. Can you find it? That will be very expensive if you try to engage an editor to do that. And it also will not, almost certainly not be as good as if you had something in mind. Also, as far as beyond the story, if you're using a prosumer camera or, not super high-end camera, there's a good chance it's going to be recording in H.264, H.265, or AVC, something like that, which doesn't have time code. And so all the clips are going to start at 0. That's not good. So you probably want to transcode everything and set a starting time code for everything, so that when you hopefully make your transcriptions, then you can reference in them the time code of where a particular line is set in the footage. And you want to make sure there are no duplicate file names in your footage. So if you have each camera roll or each card in a separate folder, then there may be duplicate file names and you'll never know. So put them all together into one folder, at least, so that you can make sure that there's no duplicates. And then you can split them out. I mean, they should have, make sure you set your clocks right, actually, come to think of it. When you're recording, make sure both the sound recorder and the camera have the correct time of day, because that makes it easier to cross-reference. Like if you have a piece of sound and you don't know where it came from, and you have all this footage, you have a chance, if it doesn't sync, to say, well, I know it was right around here. And you can just look at the time of day and line it up. Let's see. Yeah, transcribe.
Sorry,
it's
Joe,
better.
can you say just a little bit more about the transcoding and about creating the sort of the universe of your time signatures, right, before you get into the editing room?
Yeah. It's
Please.
better if you have, there's some editing friendly formats called codecs in general. So the editing friendly codecs are ProRes and DNX HD or DNX HR. ProRes is Apple, DNX is Avid, but they can both read both. The camera friendly codecs are much more compressed, like H.264, H.265, and they fit a lot on a card, but they're hard on an editing program, and they also don't have time code. And so without time code, you have the possibility of getting your files. If you need to relink media, you may end up getting the wrong files connected to the wrong clips. And I see this all the time on the Resolve forum of people saying, oh, I relinked everything and now everything's the wrong clip. And that usually happens when all the files start at 0. So Premiere, for instance, does a thing which is kind of cool, where it just says, okay, I'm going to make up the time code based on whatever the time of day is right now. And I'm going to say, well, I know it says 0, but I'm going to take the time of day and add that onto the beginning. I hope Resolve will do that one day. Right now it doesn't. There are tools out there that you can say, okay, put time code, transcode all this stuff from H.264 into ProRes and stick a time code on it based on the time of day. That's really what you want to have when you hand it off to the editor.
What would be an example of those tools? Because I think many of us have disparate collections of footage and sound and like that.
Yeah.
What are some of those tools to give us the uniform time code or one universe to work in?
Well, I don't know specifically what right now will take the time of day and put it in. I suspect that what's it called again? The free one that transcodes everything to everything. Does
Mark?
anybody remember? I'm losing it off the top of my head.
Media encoder. Media
Uh,
encoder?
encoder. Yeah. My problem with time of day is every day. So wouldn't you get duplicate time code readings that way?
well, yes, there's no way, I mean, there's only 24 hours in a day,
Right.
and so to some extent, yes, but it's much better than having everything start at zero, because it's going to look for something, in practice, a particular length of a clip that's a certain length and starts at a certain time code. It's highly unlikely that there's going to be another clip that lines up that way. So there's also, let's see, does time code go? I think it is only 24 hours. Yeah, it is.
Yes.
And back in the day, we used to just have the hour increment on for each reel. So nobody really had, when I was doing film, nobody
Yeah.
had more than 24 hours of footage. Of course, that's no longer true either.
Hey guys,
But-
we have a few questions. These
Yeah.
the two areas, transcoding and how do you set up your naming convention and time code universe, and then sound. So Sherry had a question here. So this will be for Joe. Not starting at zero. Do you mean set that on the camera? Do you want to say
most
that,
cameras,
Sherry?
Yeah, so you said don't let every clip start at zero. So I don't understand. So I filmed somebody, my very first subject, I filmed at zero, and it goes from zero to whatever time it goes. And then you're saying the next person I interview, I somehow manually set on my camera to start at 10 minutes.
no, I'm not saying
I
that.
don't understand. Okay.
Most cameras start well, it depends if you're using an Arri or a Red or something that's really a camcorder as opposed to an
Canon, say.
SLR. It has time code, and it'll usually, you can tell it use time of day time code, and then it'll just automatically set the time code in the clip to be whatever time of day you have. But a lot of the current cameras that are, lower level, less expensive, they don't even record time code. They don't know from time code. Everything just starts at zero. So the way you get around that is you have a transcoder, and I'm trying to remember what the name of, I think it's something like temp GNC or MPEG. What is it called? I can look it up.
Okay.
I usually have it off the top of my head, but I don't right now. But the
Why?
thing is, you can take what comes from your camera and then say, convert this to ProRes and add time code based on the time of day the clip was recorded. So the main thing when you're shooting is make the time of day correct on your camera.
Handbrake is one that does that also.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know it did that, but great.
Gosh, we got a lot of questions here. Let's go back to Lorraine, because I think this is a question. Lorraine said, she Lorraine, you can say it rather than my reading it. I just want to remind everybody, because then the chat will be more helpful.
And actually, it is TMPGENC, and I'll put a link to it. And it's kind of the granddaddy of all of them. And MPEG, or rather, the one that you guys just mentioned, uses TMPGENC as its backend. And here I just posted a link to the Wikipedia article about it.
Great, thanks.
But that's
Lorraine?
kind of the, say again? Yeah, that's the back end of everything. Handbrake uses it too.
I'm skipping ahead. All my questions have to do with what happens if you brought a mic with you, but you didn't use it, that everything is on camera and now you need to fix stuff. So you said about that, that voice isolator app. I'm also wondering how common is it on key sections of the film to have like main characters reread basically, even though it's not a script, but redo what they've done, how well that works, what's the best way to do it, especially if the people are in different locations.
Yeah, that's called ADR, and it's a great thing to be able to do. Some productions and historically certain countries like Italy, pretty much they do everything ADR. They record crappy audio and they know it, but their actors are very good at ADR. But that's the key, is it's hard for actors. And for documentary, I mean, are you going to get the same emotion? Probably not. So
It's going to be really hard.
It behooves you to get good audio up front, and that means using a good mic and good mic technique.
And you'll spend a lot of money in an ADR room to do that also. So that's why you get it out of the can. And you know.
So Mark, when you do your run and gun, what you say you must set up a lavalier. Do you also use a shotgun mic on your primary camera? Do you use a boom?
Yes.
What do you do as a one-man or a small crew?
Yeah, I have it right on my monopod. It's all a self-contained thing. I'm moving left and right, and I have a nice Audio Technica, beautiful little mic, and it goes into my mixer and then I double it going into the camera. I don't usually do double audio. You know, that's not what I'm doing most of the time. But I am putting a good quality mic right into my my Panasonics, and they do a good job, you know. But you know, it's all the different levels of production that sound has to be looked at, you know. But
okay,
it's so important.
Good.
I have another question. In post-production, what is the correct order of attacking audio? I mean, do you do the sound design first, and then, I mean, I'm hearing about people sending the whole film through AI and then going through and sound, you know, and finessing little bits and pieces of it. What are your thoughts on any of that?
Well, I don't I haven't used AI to try and improve the sound. I understand that there are things that do that. I don't know how well they work, or for that matter, how well they'll work on your particular situation. I imagine it varies a lot. I know Resolve has something that removes the background. It's called the voice isolator, and it does a very good job most of the time of removing the background. But as far as taking audio that's poorly recorded and fixing it, that's been kind of a time immemorial thing of garbage in, garbage out. It's very hard to really fix, but you know, maybe AI changes that. I don't really know.
Yeah, I think.
But still, when do you do the sound design? Is that considered at a later point or an earlier point?
That's very late.
Yeah, you got to lock the picture first. Lock the picture, then go back in and then do your audio and your color correct and all that stuff. But you know, when you're editing though, you're trying to make that audio sound as good as you can without tweaking it too much, because a good sound man would say, well, let me have the original. Like when you said you didn't hook up your microphone, that audio sucks. So, you know, it's going to be hard to make that sound any better with anything. That's the bottom line. It's not magic. It's not magic. We have to give it a good base before we can make it sound pristine, you know? And that's what
so
we have to shoot for, that simple base.
So the building
Mhm.
blocks. There's a number of suggestions, Lorraine, in the chat for how to address some of these things. I think for most, the focus for Mark and Joe was around how do we prepare for post so we don't get caught in the situation it sounds like you're in. So,
Right.
Joe, can you explain the difference, or one of you guys, between transcoding and logging? Right, we've shot a lot of stuff, and again,
Yeah.
that's sort of the through line for what we're going to be doing in post is logging.
Right. So transcoding is taking the footage and putting it into a format, a codec that is friendly for editing. Logging is totally different. Logging is about making notes about your footage in an editing program, most likely, so that you can put keywords on the thing. You can say, and the keywords vary depending on your project. So the names of the characters are good keywords. If there are particular actions or locations that are important to the story and things, keyword with that. Put descriptions of what the interview is, roughly is about. If you have multiple takes, just like, in a feature, you want to label the ones that you prefer. Now, the editor may not prefer it, but ultimately they're trying to work toward your taste. They're trying to make something that is in your voice. So that's another reason why it's really good after you've logged it to edit things together so that you have, the editor has some hint as to what you have in mind.
Joe, what would be the progression from you've got your raw footage and you need to do logging, transcoding, and naming conventions. So they all sort of fit.
And double sound. If you got to sync your audio first, correct?
Yeah. What would be the best optimal order of that as we move towards getting to an editing room?
Mm-hmm. So I would take the footage, bring it into my editor, my editing program, and make notes about it. Actually, if I had multiple different cameras and things, I might want to rename in general, you don't want to rename footage. It's very dangerous for the editor afterwards to rename the footage, because you got to for the colorist, you got to be able to get back to the same files. That said, if you are originally sourcing the stuff and nobody else has the footage yet, that's an opportunity before it goes out to other people for you to regularize the names, make sure that you don't have any overlapping names, things like that. So there are various tools where you can do something like say, okay, here's all these files in a folder, rename them all so that they're based on date, which is a pretty common thing. And if you have multiple cameras, base it on date, time, and give a letter for the camera. So there are some, fairly straightforward things to do that will make the name of of each clip both unique and meaningful, so that they're not just utter gobbledygook. DSC 572 is not very useful, for instance, and that's usually what comes out of the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
It's not what comes out of a Red or a Blackmagic. They don't say DSC 572. A Red or a Blackmagic or something, or an Arri will say camera A, reel 1, and then the time of day, pretty much. That's the name of the file.
I think most of us are working with DSLR or, small Sony cams, something like that. If you're working with Arris and Magic and, Red, you're in a different budget.
Well, that's why I'm suggesting. That's
a real personal
doing
doc,
this.
then, right?
That's why I'm suggesting doing this renaming step to sort of bring your media up to the level of what those professional cameras have, just as far as naming conventions, so that people can track it, so that things don't get lost.
And I know Adobe Bridge is very, very useful for that. Doing
right,
the
it might do it for you. Yeah.
Well, doing
Adobe's
both
cool.
renaming.
Adobe's cool. I use Blackmagic for various reasons, but I use Resolve. But yeah, Adobe is the most common thing out there for this price level of production right now. Though I think people are moving towards Resolve.
Suzanne has
and it's a good price, and you can get it for free, which is
Resolve.
really great.
Resolve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant. It's brilliant.
Suzanne, do you want to go ahead and say your question? We're coming down to the last like 10 minutes. So
Sure.
have people ask
Sure.
their question. Thank you.
Yeah. I am wondering how to export a complete EDL using Premiere that will include not just a single video track, but, several stack tracks, if that's the case, as well as several audio tracks.
My understanding, well, EDL isn't really made for that. And I mean, it's really made, it was made back a long time ago when people didn't have that many tracks of audio and things. I think you can only say 4 tracks of audio in an EDL. So usually what's done is you export a what is it
XML.
called? An OMF or an AAF, which are both kind of sound interchange formats. And those are the things that sound people usually accept, OMF and AAF. And those are the full generality of sound.
What about the video?
An EDL is fine for video, and XML, as I just heard mentioned, is also, but those are usually dependent on different editors. So like a lot of programs use FCP XML, even though it's going through Premiere or something like that. That seems to be a common one. And I imagine Premiere has its own format too, but I'm not sure.
Anybody else got a question?
And wait, I want to go back to Suzanne for a minute. Wherever you're taking your product, you have to ask them what they prefer. Always talk to your craft person on what they want so that you can give them exactly what they're looking for. All right?
It's actually a question I ask selfishly because I'm the one who usually needs the EDL.
Oh, okay.
But I find that with different editors, like I never know what condition it might be in. And because it seems like a lot of folks don't know what I need.
Yeah.
And so
So in what capacity do you need the EDL?
Well, I need it in order to begin licensing archival elements. And I need very precise in and out.
Yeah.
With L cuts and all that kind of stuff, hidden audio edits, and it can be a real nightmare if I don't get a clean EDL. And so I'm just trying to figure out how can I convey, how can I communicate it, how can I help them. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure that the online operators are all going to want the same stuff too, probably.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any extensions to EDL. Yeah, I just Googled it and it says a single EDL can contain up to 4 audio tracks. And
I guess it is a question of how to get with the editor early on and establish, a level of priority for those tracks, sync voice over, I don't know, ambient and
I'm
whatever
surprised that you're using EDL for that. Like, to me, that's the thing is I don't think EDL is the right format to use for that. I wish it were. I wish you could put more in it, but in general, most edit programs, actually all edit programs that I know of, only will do the standard 4 tracks.
Well, as long as the licensable material is on a single track or two of those 4 tracks, it's fine. But yeah. So
Faye
Thank
has a
you.
question. Thank you. Faye has a question.
Hi there. I'm just looking at the chat. There's a lot of detail in there.
There is.
I wonder if you, I wonder if you have, thank you for this session, by the way. It's really valuable info. Do you have advice for, so my project has a whole mix of footage. A lot of it is on an older iPhone. There's some on Canon DSLR, and then there's, I just had a professional shoot, and that cinematographer's camera is escaping me. But when I brought the footage into Premiere, sure enough, it was like these random, names of clips, like totally useless. I don't have an editor. I'm not sure when I'll have the money for an editor. So my instinct is to follow all the good advice in the chat and in this presentation. But, I'm working on Premiere, and I'm happy to play assistant editor as I catch up on the technology. But I'm just wondering, I don't feel I have a lot of choices if I don't know who my editor is in terms of setting it up the way they want it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you won't nail it exactly the way they want it, but that's okay as long as it's relatively neat and organized. I mean, if you, for instance, call the bin picture and they want it to be called footage, that's okay, they can rename it. But if all the footage is in and all the sound is in one file without any organization, that's another story. So organize it, label it, try to make it as clear and understandable as possible, and I think you'll be okay.
Okay. And if I'm preparing things in Premiere, and they are working in a different program, there are ways to.
Yeah, yes and no. Unfortunately, that's been a real bugaboo for it's not easy, but Premiere is probably the best guess.
Those coming. Okay. Thank you.
You're talking about the export files, the PREL files, I think they are in Premiere. So what is the editing data that gets transferred along with the footage is, not interchangeable between Final Cut, Premiere, Resolve, or it's difficult, right? What, Joe or Mark, what do you use if you need to convert those from one format to another? Do you have a platform that does that?
Well, it's not the footage or what it puts in the footage that's such a problem. And mostly even you can get timelines like, the EDL or the XML or something for a timeline. You can move that between editing platforms pretty well. What you can't move well, as far as I know, is the logging stuff, the structure that you've made in the project, all the notes and things like that. And I don't know, there was something at one point that somebody made, automatic duck, it was called, to go from Final Cut 7 to various other things. And Adobe bought it, and I think they killed it. So I don't know if
They killed the duck.
Yeah. The guy who wrote it still works for Adobe. But I don't know of any. Somebody says converting logging note between platforms. Yeah, I would love to know if there's any good software out there to do that. There's something called FCP to X and X to FCP, I think, which lets you go between Final Cut 10 and various other things. So that's the best that I know of out there right now.
Yeah, I would suggest, Faye, that you do a whole readout of what kind of footage you have, and then start getting that transcoded into ProRes, and then getting that code there from that transfer, so that before you even start logging and stuff, try to get your ProRes, because ProRes will go into most any system, and you'll be okay, especially with that iPhone footage and stuff like that. I mean, it looks all right when you're looking at the iPhone, but once you get it into post, it turns into another animal. So try to get your ProRes idea down, and you'll save your editor a lot of headaches.
Jonathan has a question here. Jonathan, are you you want to speak, or shall I read it off for you?
I
I'll
can
read it
speak.
off.
Yeah, I can speak. Just when you said renaming files, I'm assuming you mean doing that at the Finder level, not within the software, because if you rename the file in the software, the original name won't change on the Finder, and then they'll have two different names, one in the Finder level and one in the software. So question, do you understand the question, Joe?
Yes. What I am indeed talking about renaming things before you put them into the editing system, renaming things in the Finder and using various Finder tools. And apparently, I guess it sounds like Adobe, what's it called again? What's that front end thing for Adobe, that Bridge?
Bridge.
Yeah.
Bridge.
Sounds like Bridge will do that for you. And there are other tools out there. I mean, I've got something called Name Mangler that I've had for many years, which will just go through a folder and based on, all sorts of little patterns that you can set, it'll make those files go in sequence and, like date sequence, and it'll put however many digits that you want, just so I can get anything into a kind of neat format using Name Mangler.
What a great name.
Yeah.
So that's helpful for me. I've got lots of formats and still photographs and everything else. So I'm constantly trying to get one universe of naming conventions that's consistent. So Name Mangler, I think, could be my friend. Bridge is old. Other questions?
Cool.
Sherry's got her hand up.
Don't be shy, Sherry.
Yeah, and Tommy Franklin's had his hand up for a while as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tommy.
Yeah, let's see. The thing about the keywords, Joe, you were talking about, I'm trying to understand how you use those. Like what we do is we transcribe our interviews in Otter, and then my editor will say, let's say we're like working on a section where like, who talks about ritual? So we can go to Otter and type in ritual, and we can see everybody who said anything about ritual, and then we can go, edit with that stuff. But it sounds like you're saying in Premiere or your edit program, you could put keywords. This person talked about ritual and they talked about the environment, and then you would find things through Premiere. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'm more talking about things that aren't necessarily said. Like, for instance, keywords that say good, better, best, or mountain sunset, or various things that might be important but aren't English, aren't transcribable. And to some extent, some of the editing programs now are automatically doing that. Like, I know that iPhoto or Apple Photos you can say, show me all the cats.
Right.
So AI is kind of coming in and helping in keywording, but anything, depending on the domain of your documentary. But keywording B-roll, for instance, is really useful, or can be really useful. Also,
so you're saying just say that this is B-roll footage. So then it's like, oh, is that
not just that it is B-roll, but what kind of B-roll, what kind of mood.
I gotcha.
Keywording by emotion can be really useful, because that doesn't come from the transcription.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Then Tommy.
Okay.
Sorry, Tommy.
Yeah, so I have myself and two editors, and we're trying to, but we can't afford to. What I wish is all our files matched and we were on a server and we were all accessing the same thing like they do at HBO and stuff like that. But we just have these drives that we try to keep consistent with each other. I know there's some software out there that'll help you see like what's different on this drive or what's missing. Because what I do is I'm generating new material all the time, then I have to drive to the editor and have a folder and put it in her thing. Then she's got to import, it's a nightmare.
The tool that I use is called Folders Synchronizer. So there's two S's in there. And there's probably a million of these. That's just the one that I happen to use. Just like Name Bangler, there's probably many of them. But Folders Synchronizer is the one I use.
Okay, Tommy, sorry for the delay.
Hey y'all, thanks for doing this. And I was just thinking of when Faye was talking earlier about like, like we don't have that, 150,000 for the editor that you need up front. We can be broke for 5-10 years, but we need that editor money if we want to talk to them. So as I'm starting to talk to editors, as far as organization goes, I'm just trying to organize and log my footage, just hiring someone to do that around the basis of not the editing software. Yes, we have Premiere, we've organized it there, but at the very least, an AE is like breaking it all down in spreadsheets and then gonna put everything in Frame.io for when we're ready to share it with the group. Because at the end of the day, I just want the editor, when they start in month one, not to spend a month going through it in as least disorganized as possible. That way, if I can only afford to pay them for 3 months for now, I know that they're just kind of hitting the ground running and I'm not losing money essentially. So yeah, just as much organization, even outside of editing tools, will set your editor up once you make a deal, to not waste your money, really.
Yes. And things like mechanical things like syncing the sound, and getting the formats to match, things like that. Those are things that the editor is a very expensive version of. You'd rather have an assistant or somebody who's less expensive do that. Peter, you're muted.
Advice or experiences around Frame.io. I mean, it used to be a common platform for sharing notes, giving feedback, doing scenes. Any experiences there or advice there that would be helpful?
I haven't used it enough to say. I'm usually so much of a one-man band editing wise that, I mean, in practice, what I usually do is I'll edit and then I'll put cuts up on a private YouTube and people will view it that way. So Frame.io is better. It's better to do it that way.
And
it's more expensive
money,
too. Yeah.
Right? It's costly. Very expensive is what Tommy's saying. Exactly. Any other questions? There's one from Richard. Go ahead, Richard.
Hello. Yeah, I'm also from a one-man band to other one-man bands there. I do the editing and stuff myself. You mentioned a private YouTube link. I actually had a project that I lost. I thought I lost, but I had one of those that I shared, and 6 years later, I saved the project that way. But my question based on that is, what are your strategies for backing up footage and backing up projects? How do you duplicate and save things?
I try to export when I'm like being paid. I try to export something every day, have an export of a file. I also like to just email it to myself in Gmail, because they're going to save it. It's going to be there. Years and years later, it'll still be there. That the project file, of course, is far more, it's easier to save, and it contains more editing information than the media does. The media needs to be saved, the old saw, it's got to be saved in at least 3 places. And that's not usually me doing that. That's the responsibility of the client, I think, to, make sure that they have a copy. And if mine blows up, they're going to be able to give me a new one. Because, I mean, it can be other ways, but people are usually not paying me for, saving the media in triplicate. So, and also,
and Joe, as an editor, do you ask your client, do you have that saved other places?
I tell them, you do have this, right? This is not one of your only copies. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So, but then what Sherry was saying, if you have, so you're working on your project and, after say a month, you've got duplicate copies of it, but then after a month, you've added all this other stuff. How often do you back up, the big project rather than just the edit file?
Well, I mean, the
Daily.
big project, what do you mean by that? The media?
Well, you've added footage, you've added some art, you've downloaded some archival film. You
Yeah.
have a bunch of stuff, and you're not even sure what you have. Photographs that's new, but you want to make sure it's copied onto another hard drive. Is that
Yeah.
the thing where you use like a folder sync? Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah. Mhm. And I also, as much as I can, I tend to put something in the cloud too. If I
Well-
have space, I'll like P-Sync, for instance, is a relatively affordable cloud storage. If I have enough space in Google Drive, I'll do that for my active project at the moment. And eventually I'll media manage things down to just what is really necessary to build the project. Most any editing platform has a media manage, which just pretty much says delete everything that's not in use and make the smallest version. And usually I have a lot of hard drives floating around, that have projects from 20 years ago. And I don't expect anybody to need them. And I'm not going to guarantee they work, but I do have them.
Hey Joe,
Yeah.
are you coloring also on Resolve? Are you doing the whole gamut on
I
Resolve?
can.
Okay.
I don't bill myself as a colorist, but I
Okay.
do know how to color.
Yeah.
Usually I'd rather have somebody who that's their core competency doing it. And it's often the cinematographer. They often want to do it.
Interesting.
That, of course, is really more for when you have a
Yeah.
cinematographer. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's narrative, and I do a lot of narrative also. I don't do just doc.
Yeah.
Good. So any other questions we've come up? We're on the hour. Joe and Mark have been very, very helpful and very generous with their time. Any other last questions? Or Joe and Mark, do you want to do sort of your pearls of wisdom? Joe called them pinch points that he's learned from all these years. What would be your top 3 takeaways or that you want other people to take away from your experience in our call today?
My thing is do your homework and enjoy the process, enjoy the craft, and you'll have a lot better time. And you know what? I'm 67 and I'm learning something every day, and that's what this craft is about. And so I think you need to embrace that and not be scared of it. And because you're not going to break anything in our nonlinear shit anymore, so just know that the technology is helping us, and just be organized. That's the thing. You have to be organized, but enjoy it. That's it.
And Joe?
Oh boy, this is hard. Yeah, this one is hard. Do your best to collaborate with your editor rather than treating them as a button pusher. You are the person who has the final say, but the editor has a lot of experience with story, and often, especially when somebody's the writer and the director, as is usually the case with a doc, it's easy to get too close to it and not see that the doc is not understandable by other people. And the editor, on the other hand, is pretty good at noticing when, oh, this is not going to come through. People are going to get confused here. So listen to them about that, and also be willing to put out earlier versions to various people that you don't know, not just your friends. and I love to just watch people watching my movie. I don't want to hear what they say about it later. I just want to watch them, and it'll be clear when they're confused, when they're engrossed, when they're bored. Those are my useful tips, I think.
That's great.
I think they're very useful.
That's great.
And one of the things that we came up with, just the three of us in our conversations, was humility. That this is a daunting and can be a very long process. It's very detail oriented. You can get exhilarated and depressed all in like 5 minutes. And so Joe and Mark had both said, we're going to make mistakes. Okay. So, and that's fine. Just avoid the magical thinking, right? That it's just going to all somehow come together, because we're the magic makers, and we're the people that need to prepare, right? Preparing for post, prepare for post, or pay.